Hello, Texans. Welcome to the Susana Gibb Show, where we celebrate the spirit of Texas, its entrepreneurs and artists who live with a wild heart. I'm your host, Susana Gibb, and today we delve into the mystical and the powerful with our guest, Linda Katz. She's the author of Homecoming and the visionary behind Singing Bird Coaching. Linda embodies the unconquerable Texas mystique, and she's here to guide us on the journey of reclaiming our wild feminine soul, the heroine's journey, and the masculinity and femininity that are a part of all of us. So, as always with this podcast, we kind of start with an idea of where we're headed, and then it goes this way as it took us unexpected places. So, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy. Before we get to that, I want to talk with you about our sponsor. This episode of the Susana Gibb Show is brought to you by Gibb Insurance Services. We have proudly been serving Texas for 27 years. Whether it's home, auto, health, life, Medicare, commercial insurance, we have you covered. We've also been recognized as the best in Dallas by D Magazine, and we are eagerly awaiting the announcement of this year's Best in DFW. We won silver last year and we were nominated this year, and it's 100% voted on by you, our community. So we are fingers crossed on that one. And it's always been about more than just insurance at Gibb Insurance Services. It's really about the people. It's why we started this podcast. So we are dedicated to making sure that our clients are taken care of every step of the way. So if you're in the market for a best in Dallas insurance team, I hope you will trust us. We've been trusted by Texans for nearly 3 decades. You can go to gibbagencydallas.com to connect with us. Lastly, my wild Texas friends, I want to talk to you about reviews. Your feedback means the world to us. We love hearing from our listeners. We'd love to feature you on the show. If you've been enjoying the Susana Gibb Show, please take a moment to give us a review. Share your thoughts, favorite episodes, anything that's resonated with you, something that you'd like to see. Who knows? We may read your review on the air. So thank you for your support. We can't wait to hear from you. All right. It's time. Grab your favorite Texas-sized beverage. It's time. On with the show. Thank you so much for being here. Tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Hello there. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Linda Sewallius Katz. I am a wild feminine life coach for women. I'm the author of the book Homecoming, One Woman's Story of Dismantling the Inner Cage and Freeing Her Wild Feminine Soul. I'm also an artist, writer, and a Koya movement teacher, currently based in Plano, Texas, where I live with my husband and my doggie.
So let's talk about wild feminine soul, if we can. Is that your phrase or is that somebody else's phrase?
I'm trying to remember where that actually came from. I don't think I made it up by any stretch of the imagination. I think I first came across the idea of the wild feminine when I read Women Who Run with the Wolves, probably about a decade ago by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And there was something about the ring to that, the wild feminine soul, that I was like, what is that? I don't know, but I want more of it in my life. Whatever it is, I know that I need a little extra juice.
Yeah. So did you read a lot of what I wanted to talk to you about today? I mean, your book is really super fun, and we'll get into that a little bit, but I have spent a ton of time acting and screenwriting and all of these things, and somehow missed the boat when somebody, I don't know, I didn't know of the heroine's journey until you told me about it. And then I had to go and do some research on it. So what is the heroine's journey? And how did this come before or after your wild feminine soul?
This
or at
came
the same time?
After, I think, that I discovered the heroine's journey. So the term, I think, was first coined by Maureen Murdoch. So not most, but many people are familiar with the hero's journey. And we can see it, as coined by Joseph Campbell. We see it in a lot of stories. We see it in a lot of movies, right? It's kind of Joseph Campbell's idea was that this is like the meta story. Like this is the story that undergirds all stories. and that all the other
Any adventure
stories.
story, right?
Yep.
The
Yep.
Star Wars, the Matrix, the hero's call to action. The hero says, no, I can't be that special. I
Yep.
can't go do those things. And then they proceed to go do those things, right?
Yes. Yes. And then
So,
they get the boon and they come back to their wherever it was that they left, etc. Right. So we're all kind of
yes.
familiar with that story. And as this version goes, Maureen Murdoch worked with Joseph Campbell. And when she asked him, like what's going on with women? Because it's always stories about men that are going out and doing these things. And allegedly Joseph Campbell said, well, nothing. the women the women are just there. They're the place where everyone wants to get to. At which point Maureen Murdoch said, yeah, I don't think you understand women. And so
Yeah,
she
no.
wrote The Heroine's Journey. And I want to say that this doesn't break down along lines of gender. I think that women go on the hero's journey just as I think men go on the heroine's journey, or there ought to be space for that to happen. It's just where the hero's journey is up and out, the heroine's journey is down and in. I think that we cultivate certain aspects of who we are on our hero's journeys of our lives. We cultivate courage, we cultivate kind of this maybe a more external sense of self versus the heroine's journey. One way to think about it is it's like becoming more real, becoming more true versions of ourselves. It's the journey down and in. It's a journey of integrating and making space for all of the different parts that we are. And oftentimes living in a patriarchal culture, especially as women, there are certain aspects that are either lifted up or pushed down. And based upon, what kind of version of femininity we ascribe to, whether it's something that we are striving for or something that we push back against, oftentimes what happens is that there are aspects of who we are that are just not culturally welcomed. And so the heroine's journey is a way to begin to reclaim those so that we become more whole versions of who we are.
So if we were to do, and I'm trying to remember all the steps, and we don't necessarily have to get to all the steps, but the first step in the heroine's journey is, remind me.
I can't remember which one it was
Rejection of the
from.
masculine, right?
Yeah.
It's rejection of the feminist.
Well, so I feel like with the Maureen Murdoch version, so my version of the heroine's journey, which I'm a little bit more familiar with, which kind of is based on her version, but isn't exactly the same. It picks up in what I call the fall season. So I like to think of it in seasons. So Maureen Murdoch's version, if I'm not misremembering, I think actually includes the hero's journey. Like that's like the first part of her heroine's journey. And then what happens is that we get the boon, right? So we can put this in very concrete example, right? You go get the corporate high paying job, right? You're going for whatever it is, breaking the glass ceiling. I'm going to get the corner office, whatever our kind of dream is that we're getting. And then we achieve it. And that's kind of the end of the hero's journey. It's like, ta-da, I have arrived. I have achieved what I meant to. And then the heroine's journey comes in where we're like, but is this it? Like, now what? And it kind of, so to me, it's those feelings of the descent that she words it as being kind of feelings of spiritual aridity, which I think is that word aridity, like that dryness, like there's a suppleness, there's a juice, there's something that is missing in our lives that I think that our culture and our society doesn't really do a very good job of even naming. And so that can be the kind of what I consider to be one of the initial steps is to notice.
Like a midlife crisis.
Yes. Which is why this happens around midlife, right? It totally does. It's
like, is this it? Is this what I'm doing?
Yep.
There's got to be more. I'm going to go buy that thing. I'm going to solve it materialistically.
Yes.
Right? Or you dive in.
Yes.
Okay.
About becoming, and it's really uncomfortable, right? It's the process of diving into these questions. I think is this it? Or is there something more? Feels like it's like I've worked my whole life for this. And it feels like just asking the question could be like, shit. Like, it's like, now what? And we start to come into that like place of being in relationship with the unknown, not only the unknown out there, but even more terrifying oftentimes is the unknown within, where it's like, well, what do I actually long for? What do I love? When I strip away everything that I've been taught that I should be, that I should desire, that I should want, that I should go for, when that starts to fall away, what is left?
So that's your fall season starts it. The
Yep.
winter is when you literally sit with it, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
which, COVID was a mandatory winter for many, many people, which is why I
Yes.
think so many people changed during COVID because they were
Yeah.
forced to sit,
Mm-hmm.
not go out
100%.
and be, stay in it. And I've read this in different places that the challenge for places like Texas, for example, we don't have a big winter.
Yeah.
We're not forced to stay inside and really kind of do that hibernation, which is important for our soul and our self, and being aware of going, you know what, there's got to be a season to chill, woman, chill.
Yeah. Yes, a fallow season, right? Like when we think about growing food, where there has to be a place where we let the ground be fallow, where we're not constantly cultivating and producing it, And I think that's part of the feminine too that we're reclaiming as that cyclical wisdom that I think that we've lost, where there is this expectation that we're going to show up and we're going to produce and we're going to be the same day after day after day after day. And when we can't anymore, we're like, something has gone terribly wrong. But in reality, It's like, no, you're just a human being. This is what happens when there is space for it. And like you said, I think that living somewhere where there isn't any of that invitation from a seasonal kind of weather standpoint does make a difference. It's almost like we get that a little bit during our summer season because it's so hot that sometimes that forces us inside a little bit more. I almost think of it as the summer season here in Texas is almost a pseudo winter for us because the extreme heat forces us inside.
Yeah, we got to stay in kind of.
Yeah. There's less of that like summer, like pulsing energy. And I think for me, like I often say that I feel like I suffer from like a seasonal depression in the month of August because I'm always like, oh my God, August. Because it's 105 every day and I can't go outside. It's like, it is that it's just a little bit shifted.
One of the other things I thought was really interesting in your book, which was coming to terms with the good girl.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell, give a description of what the good girl is?
I mean, the good girl, the name kind of says it all, right? It's that aspect of us. It's that energy that is, that wants to be good, that is always pleasing, that is never angry, right? You cannot be good and angry at the same time. Guess what? You can't be? You can't be good and sad at the same time. You always have to put on a mask. You always have to be, especially for women, I would say to be a good woman, we are taught over and over again that we have to be self-sacrificing, that to care for another means that we are not going to care for ourselves, that there's kind of this like, either or that we're trapped in. So the good girl kind of ascribes, when we're in that energy, we ascribe to a level of goodness that I would say is actually inhuman. Like we're always trying so hard to be good that we don't leave any space for the messiness of our humanity. That like we will always have parts of ourselves that are displeasing to others, and we will have parts of ourselves that are displeasing to us. Like, for example, I am extremely competitive at card games. It doesn't come out almost anywhere else. But if I play a game of cards and I lose, I am legitimately mad. And my husband was like, he's like, you're a horrible role model for children. And I was like, I never claimed to be a role model. It's like, that's one of the places where I'm like, I'm not going to pretend and smack on the face and be like, no, it's okay. I don't care that I'm losing. It's like, no, for that moment, I really care. And can I be okay with that? Can I be okay with in this area, like That is not the good girl. Like I go into full on 12-year-old version of me and I'm pissed, I'm salty. I need 10 minutes and then I'll be fine. So I think we try to put women in these boxes a lot of the times, or and then we try to live up to expectations that I don't think are actually, like I said, they're inhuman. They don't leave any space for messiness, for gray areas, for mistakes, for any of it.
One of the things I really liked about when you talked about, the good girl is when you become aware of the good girl and you're ready to kind of shed her, right? You're like, no, I'm comfortable with being mad that I lost at this card game, but not like leaning into who your good girl was, how she helped you, how she protected you throughout the years without like practicing self-loathing against this good girl who is really you at the same time.
Yes. I think that is when it comes to the fall season of seeing what I kind of call that inner cage, of which the good girl is a large part. I would say the biggest snafu or stumbling block that women come across is meeting that part of ourselves with loathing and disgust. And it just furthers that same pattern of self-hatred. It furthers being at war with a part of ourselves. It just pushes all of that down, where it's like, yes, what the good girl wants is to belong. She wants to feel like she's a part of something. She wants to be in relationship. It's just that the ways that she's learned to do that don't leave any space for actual authenticity and thus for actual real relationships. But to hate her only furthers the divide within ourselves. And then we harden, right? Like I think that oftentimes what we see, and when you look out at it culturally, we can start to see that there's a bit more of a consciousness around the energy of the good girl. And we're starting to see like what I call her shadow sister, the rebel, like rising up. And the rebel is like the antithesis, right? She's everything that we couldn't be when we were in the good girl. She's like tough and hard and doesn't give a crap about what other people think of her. And so we're seeing this energy really coming forth, but neither of those is a true whole version of who we are. It's like we need the spine of the rebel, but we need the softness as well. We need the softness of the good girl. We need the vulnerability.
The other thing that you explore a lot in your book is masculinity compared to femininity. And there were parts, and when I first started reading this, that I was like, listen, don't start labeling me as a woman as this. Like I felt myself rising a little bit because I get tired of people telling me what women are and what women aren't and how it's been like that for forever. And it feels like it's coming from a very patriarchal place.
Yes.
And then you wrote, but maybe let's lean in and see what is there to look at and to examine. And
Right.
so that part of me was like, all right, calm down. We're just going to lean in. I felt real challenged. I'm going to be honest. I was like really challenged by it, but I was like, okay, I'm going to go with you, Linda. I don't know where we're going, but I'm going. I'm going to go with you and I'm going to think about it and be challenged by it and re-examine and go, it's kind of like that. You got to go in and be like, what do I think about this?
Yes.
How do I feel about it? And sit with it.
Yeah. And I mean, I had the same, and let me put up first and foremost, I do think that some of what we have been taught and what is considered to be masculine and feminine has been very much colored by a patriarchal culture. So there is that first and foremost. And second, what I realized for myself, because I had the same reaction, I was like, this is stupid. I was like, of course, the feminine gets all the crappy ones. Like they get to be darkness instead of light and the body instead of the mind and, like all this stuff. And then I started to have this kind of like kernel, this question that arose within me that I also did not like at first, which was, what if the fact that I also denigrate those things, that I denigrate the body from the mind, that I denigrate matter, what if that is evidence of how patriarchy has actually set its roots within me? That I am
Mm-hmm.
falling into it because I'm viewing all of these things that might be traditionally called feminine as less than.
Well, we obviously need both masculine and feminine for sure, which I found that interesting as well. Like I can have these qualities which are labeled masculine and they are part of me as well. But why why do you talk about the like feminine is the body? Will you go
Mhm.
through that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that typically the feminine is oftentimes associated with matter. So, like the word for mother comes from mater, which is matter. Like there
Mm,
is a certain, it's oftentimes associated with embodiment, also with presence, with immanence. So when we think of, if we were to look at it in terms of divine masculine and divine feminine, we see the divine masculine as kind of this like transcendent divinity. So we see it as, a God that is not here typically versus a feminine idea or construction of divinity is more immanent, right? So it's here, it's in our lives, it's in our bodies. We don't have to transcend the human experience in order to achieve it necessarily. I don't know if that answered your
I also
question.
really kind of it, yeah, well, for sure. It actually added to stuff that you said, which was, women are probably more in tune, generally speaking, more in tune with their bodies because babies grow inside of them. Hello, we got to be
Yep.
conscious of that, right?
Yep.
There is a cyclical, we have a menstrual cycle that happens and it's always like, wait a minute, is it coming soon? Where am I? How do I feel? What's going on in my body? Am I close? Can I wear these white pants? No. Um, as well as menstrual cycles tied with the moon. The
Yeah.
moon comes out at night. There's your nighttime versus light, which that did
Hmm.
tick me off when you first wrote it. I was like, why? Why do we get the night? Why do they
Right.
get the light? But
Right.
there's things to lean into it on that.
Right. It's like why do we dislike the night? Like why do we feel like it's less important? It brings up so many of these questions, for sure. And I love the way that you brought in like that daily cyclical rhythm that while we're menstruating, that's just our lived reality that can bring us into our bodies and bring us into the fact that every day is different. You know what I mean? It's like your hormones are different, your body feels different, what you're craving is different. Like to expect that we're going to show up the same every day is such a negation of the lived reality as a woman. And I think because we lived in a patriarchal culture where like so many of the yardsticks have been set by men's experiences, it's like we don't even realize that this is just we're taught to ignore over and over the actual lived experience of what it means to live in this body.
Do you talk with men much about reclaiming their feminine side? Right? Like, because I think men a lot of times are like, no, we can't cry. We
Mhm.
can't show emotion. Um, and is emotion only feminine? Is emotion masculine? Where does it live? How do you talk to people about that?
So I consider it to be kind of more in the realm of the feminine. And by that, I do not mean at all that it belongs in the realm of women solely. I think that it is the feminine to me is really this missing aspect of humanity. Like, because of the fact that we have, we elevate thought and we push down feeling. And so we have men and women alike, but probably even more so men have to, in order to become fully human, we have to start to open up to the world of emotion, right? To the world of feeling. And I think in particular, there's not as much space for it for men as there is for women. There's not very much space for it in women either, but there's definitely more And there's more cultural acceptance around it than there is for men.
So, circling back to this heroine's journey, I know one of the movies that you mentioned was when you can see it and see the process, right? Because movies to me sometimes are just kind of like, it's like you go to church for a minute, you come out and you're like, oh, I'm inspired, right? Um, Eat, Pray, Love was one of the ones that you said, which I haven't seen in a long time, but I do know that she goes on that inner journey with herself. Are there any other ones that you end up talking to your clients about when you're trying to say, this is an example of what somebody else goes through?
Yeah. I think, as I was thinking about it, I was like, you can even see the Barbie movie, which is something that a lot of people have seen. I think it's kind of a mix between the hero's journey and the heroine's journey, because yes,
Ooh,
she
I'm
does
fascinated by
leave
this.
like Barbie land, but the
Okay.
journey that she undergoes is not a hero's journey, right? She's not Wonder Woman. Like, she undergoes this journey to become more real, to
Yeah, she's like,
recognize.
who am I?
Yes.
Who am I?
And that moment where, like, the tears, like the feeling, like to be able to be this human rather than put into a box, to me, I'm like, now that is the heroine's journey, right? It's
That is a heroine's journey. That's so good. That even the Billie Eilish song, What Am I Made For?
yes, yes. And how do we define that for ourselves rather than having society define it for us? I think that's such an important part, is like, how do we define, like, I love that question. What am I made for? No
Mm-hmm.
one else can tell us that.
I know a lot of men really liked the Barbie movie, and there were a lot of men that found it boring.
Mm.
Um, and part of me wonders if maybe it was because they didn't grow up with Barbies and didn't get all the jokes that went past them. And the flip side of that is like, well, do they not want to go on that inner journey of femininity? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I wonder if the way in which we show it, I think, might have to be a little bit different. But I mean, it is, I'm not going to lie, I would say it's an uphill battle. There's so much still from the time that boys are very young. I remember there's a book by Carol Gilligan called The Birth of Pleasure. And she talks about how the split for young girls between like who they are and who they experience themselves to be versus who culture and society wants them to be tends to happen right around puberty, right? It tends to happen around 12, 13, 14, where all of a sudden, we might be outside running with the boys, climbing trees, and then we're taught like, no, 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 that's not what girls do, right? Like at a certain point, that's kind of the cultural language, but we can still remember a time before that happened. And I think for that reason, it gives me goosebumps. It's like, it's almost easier in some ways for women to go on the journey because there's like a kernel that we can remember of like, oh, I remember when I was a kid, I used to love horseback riding or being out in nature or whatever it was, swimming. But for boys, what she says in that book is that it happens much earlier. Like the kind of, let me use the word indoctrination, but that's the word that comes to mind, tends to happen right as boys enter school at age 5. So before that, they're soft, right? Little boys are so
Mm.
tender, open-hearted, sensitive, right? As everyone is, but right around the time when they go to school, oftentimes it can be as a form of protection. They're taught subtly and not so subtly that that's not okay anymore, that we need to harden because otherwise the other boys are going to make fun of you. You might become, subject to bullying. And so often, in the name of protecting our little boys, we end up cutting them off from the reality of who they are and this beautiful, like, softness and relationship and all of it that exists within them. And I think because it happens so early, men don't even have a recollection necessarily of what they lost.
Interesting. That's super interesting. I do find it interesting when you talk about like women, because we grew up watching male heroes and we had to learn to identify with male heroes, that now that there are so many more female heroes on the hero's journey, that men can identify, and boys growing up can identify with female heroes or heroines, the same way that it's also okay for men. And I don't know of a great, and you might know of a good movie that has a man going on the heroine's journey, which is going inside.
Yeah.
But I know that there are examples of it. Like, I watch my son, and he has no problems watching a female hero. But I have older male relatives that they're just like, they don't bash it. They just say, I just didn't find that show interesting. I just didn't really like it. This, what we grow up listening, what we grow up hearing, how that affects us later is huge.
Yeah. And I would love to see more stories, movies, shows that bring forth a bit more of that heroine's journey for men in ways that really can land, because I don't think we can be full human beings without it. Like no human being is immune unless, like pretty much to emotion, to having an emotional response, that it's just that we are unconscious of it. So it's like it just stays under the radar. It lives in the body, but it never makes its way to consciousness, which I wonder also, this is a total side note, but of, a lot of diseases and things, it's like our body will hold the things that we can't actually consciously process. But I would love to see, different kinds of stories. Not only, I think it's like, not only different characters in the same type of story, which is a step in the right direction, I would say. But it's like one step out of many. And now it's like, different characters' perspectives. Like the story that could be told, by a woman versus a man is entirely different. The story that can be told by me, by a woman who lives, across the world in a very different environment, is an entirely different type of story. And so rather than getting stuck in the mono story, it's like, let's populate it with a diversity of experiences and voices. Like that, I think, is what's really going to shift our world.
I think what was super exciting for me last year is having auditioned for so many, I was the lead's girlfriend or the lead's wife or the bad guy's girlfriend. I was the secondary characters because people wouldn't come to watch a movie that had a female lead in it. It was not economically viable because men were the drivers of the economic films, right?
Yep.
And then last year, Barbie came along and Taylor Swift came along and showed us a new version of female heroes that are very much economically viable. And it's, I think, a very exciting place for us to be as women and celebrating women. And I kind of love it. I kind of love it myself.
I do too, because otherwise it's like the chicken versus the egg kind of a thing, right? It's like, yes, maybe young men have been the drivers, the economic drivers of going to the movies, but what movies are being made? They're the ones that appeal to that demographic. And so it kind of just goes in a circle. But when they made a movie that appealed to another demographic, women showed up in huge numbers and laughed and cried and took pictures with Barbie, in Barbie boxes. Like I think we are hungry for different types of stories.
Do you feel like people are, like I was initially, I was challenged by what you wrote about as far as this is feminine, this is what's considered masculine? Or do you think people are like really ready to talk about it? Like, where do you think we are as a culture as far as exploring our feminine side? Are we still kind of got it off to the side? We're like, no, we're not quite ready for you. Or,
I think we're kind of ready for it. I think from my perspective and the type of work that I do, what I almost see as the bigger, like, scary thought is that when it's wielded with this kind of line of absolutes, of like, it becomes prescriptive, that it's like, to be a woman, you have to be feminine. And then these are the qualities of how you perform this femininity for the world. And I see a lot of that. And I hope that there's healthy pushback, right? Like, there ought to be. Like, I do not have any desire to go back to the 1950s, right? That is not what this is about. And so I think it's really like breaking down those absolutes, those areas of black or white, and allowing in greater nuance, a greater gray area, so that it's more about what are the aspects of me. And femininity and feminine energy can be one name that we use to describe it. And if people don't like it, it's like, use another name. I don't care. Call it something different, right? But it's about reclaiming these aspects of who we are that have been lost because they have been culturally devalued.
Interesting. What a lovely spot to tell people how they can find you if they want to explore a little bit more about this, find their wild feminine soul, talk to their good girl, find their rebel girl, get rid of the tyrant king, who we didn't even talk about, but that's a whole other thing. And I do love that name. How do people find you?
So the best place is via my website, singingbirdcoaching.com, or via Instagram at singingbirdcoaching. And if you want a taste of the point of view of this work, the best place to get it is my book, Homecoming, which is available via Amazon, because it's not something that lends itself to necessarily always a short snippet of an Instagram post. It really... It's like you got to sit down over the course of a few meals and slowly digest and take it in and see what resonates and what doesn't.
Where did the name Singing Bird Coaching come from?
It came from my mom. So my nickname growing up was Singing Bird because I was always singing. I still do. And my mom just always said, she was like, you're my little singing bird. You're always singing. And so when I started to go on this journey for myself, that was an aspect that I wanted to reclaim, was that really just authentic expression and that authentic joy that I had as a kid.
We just read this recently, and I think, when I was growing up in church, they were like, singing is the way to celebrate, right?
Yeah.
But the thing that we read was that if you're feeling anxious, start humming. It can interrupt the anxious thoughts. I was like, well, if you're singing, that's like a form of humming. So no wonder you were a happy little girl when you were singing.
Yes. Yes.
Because you got to sing then.
Yes.
Yeah, it was really
more
cool.
Singing, more dancing. I think that's what we need.
More singing, more dancing, which we didn't get to the Koya stuff. She's also, initially how I had found her was because I'm interested in learning more about Koya, which is a form of, describe it for me because I'm going to butcher it.
Dance / intentional movement. Right. But it is dance based. Yeah.
Linda's going to start having classes that we can go to. She hasn't decided this yet, but I'm putting it out there into the universe because I want to go try it out.
It is really fun. So I need a little kick in the booty on occasion.
Well, thank you again for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Literally, there was so much in her book that it was hard for me to choose what to talk about. But in honor of the masculine and feminine inside us all, we're going to feature the hero's journey in a few weeks. So that'll be fun. And please come back for that. Before we wrap up today's episode, I just want to take a moment to bring back something that we haven't talked about in a while, which is our Just Take 10. With school starting up, life getting busier, there's more traffic, there's more people. Take a little time to carve out some time just for you. I talk to so many busy people. I'm like, what do you do to relax? And they're like, I don't do anything. I don't take any time for me. I don't have any time for me. It's given all to the kids. But we need that time for ourselves, whether it's enjoying a little cup of something, taking a walk, having a mindful moment. It's all good. Just take 10. Thank you for being with us again, and we will see you next week.